Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jose Maria Gutierrez, and on behalf of the organization that supports this activity, I welcome all of you to this side event at the United Nations 2023 Water Conference. In this event, we will discuss the urgency of bringing fierce new voices to international water fora, to openly challenge corporate-led strategies for water and propose systemic alternatives. Today, we will have 5 presentations and a discussion section. For the people interested, we have interpretation services in Spanish, French, and Arab, which you can select by clicking the globe at the bottom of the screen and selecting the language you want to hear. We kindly request that you send your comments and questions through the chat. At the end of the presentations, there will be read and answered or discussed. As an introduction to our event, indigenous leaders and representatives from climate justice community have, at recent United Nations Climate and Biodiversity conferences, issued a fierce critique to the logic of capitalism and the growth economy, which is destroying the planet. By challenging this situation, they have proposed alternatives to false high-tech solutions that leave intact the current paradigm of global economy, focused on endless growth and the role of corporations in maintaining the status quo. This situation is particularly evident in the case of water, where corporate influence has grown to a point that it hampers urgent discussions about the depth of the water crisis that we face on a global basis. It is therefore urgent to cultivate a culture of dissent and to bring new voices and leaders into international water fora and decision-making instances at all levels. This is the rationale behind this side event of today. In this session, representatives from water justice coalitions in Central and Latin America, the Middle East, and Southern Western United States will discuss first case studies in basins being held up as a model for corporate-led water management, weighing the costs and benefits of strategies such as private-public alliances in water policy and water markets, among others. In addition, we will discuss the game-changing strategy of actively cultivating necessary dissent in international water fora and in water decision-making spheres by inviting and nurturing stakeholders proposing radically different frameworks for water management. Our first speaker today is Teddy Ogborn. Teddy is a climate activist and peace organizer in New York City. He is the War is Not Green campaign coordinator for Code Pink, working in the intersections of the anti-war and climate movements. Welcome, Teddy, and thank you very much.
There we go. Thank you. It seemed I was not able to unmute myself. Thank you, Jose, for that introduction. I'm very excited to be a part of this event and very excited to hear from my co-panelists. I'll attempt to provide a bit of an overview with also a lens of the anti-militarism work that I do with Code Pink. The story we hope to tell is deeply complex and intertwined. This is the nature of climate change, water advocacy, and environmentalism. It is difficult to encapsulate the causes of the crises we face, impossible to simply sum up their effects without omitting many billions of human stories and voices at play. The philosopher Timothy Morton calls climate change a hyperobject, a physical phenomenon with reach so great it is simply impossible to examine any single part of it without omitting many others. This is also very clearly true of water and water rights. It is clear then that a primary challenge of climate change and water is to even tell the story of the crisis. I'm grateful to the UN and to this coalition we're here now part of for providing the space to attempt to do so in such a way that may shed light not merely on the existence of the crisis, but its inherent causes and some solutions. Perhaps one place for us to begin, and which my co-panelists may touch on, is the clear cause of many of the problems discussed in public water fora. If climate change and water scarcity are symptoms, what is the underlying illness? First, I would like to posit what the illness is not. The illness is not simply humans. I've been in many conversations about climate change and natural resource mismanagement or exploitation over the years, where an acquaintance will lament that humans are somehow a disease on this planet. I mean, just look around at what we've done, they'll say. Without offering a real solution, they say that humans are a kind of virus or that we have become somehow inherently unnatural. This is an absurd position to take. The briefest of history lessons will demonstrate that once in all corners of the globe, and still in some, human beings living together did so prosperously without destroying their environment, causing water scarcity with greed, or making the planet uninhabitable for others. No, we must name the variables which do invariably draw our species closer to extinction and water mismanagement. We must name the cause. The cause is corporate control. The cause is the facility with which those who have generated or have inherited extreme wealth come to wield it as power over others. It is a select group of humans who have propagated a system which benefits them most. And it must be said, and cannot be said enough, the cause is capitalism, manifesting today as neoliberalism, which via unmitigated extraction of fossil fuels, water, natural resources, and human labor, ultimately is the cause of the devastating floods and droughts that we experience today and drags us along in leaps and bounds towards further inequality and potential extinction. Corporate-led and high-tech solutions, therefore, such as desalination, water markets, nature-based solutions, public-private partnerships, which we will discuss later in the discussion, will allow us to continue our way of life and growth economy benefiting very few people, and will allow us to continue the status quo and expand so-called sacrifice zones, which are being more widely accepted. This philosophy opens the door to speculation and delays the conversations we must have. We can no longer frame this conversation in decades, we're talking years and months. Issues, or rather I should say crises, like climate change, rising fascism, and the anti-environmentalism tied therein, and the corporate consolidation of natural resources and capital are intersecting to not merely maintain the rate at which water access is threatened, but to accelerate the pace of the issue. In this space, it is incumbent upon us to discuss the widest range of scenarios we're facing and to not shy away from tackling those most challenging or legally protected misappropriations of water. The solutions to the water crisis have been known for decades, and when it comes to indigenous wisdom, we may say many solutions have been known and implemented for millennia before there was such manufactured problem to solve. It feels almost absurd to continue having to reiterate that water is life, and that manufactured scarcity or duplicitous so-called solutions are logistically impossible and morally unacceptable. We need to discuss the widest range of scenarios that we are facing, including the extremely difficult ones, and acknowledge that they have been known for decades. Even given the fact that corporations have more say over water than any entity in the world in international spaces and at the level of the basin, it's vital to underscore that the only public sector with its focus on the common good can authentically guarantee the rights of nature framework and environmental flow science with their focus on safeguarding nature and the difficult conversations about power structures this involves. All water conversations, as climate and biodiversity conversations, must ultimately focus on the urgent need to overhaul the global economy with global tax reform, a conversion from GDP or gross domestic product to GPI or genuine progress indicator metrics, guaranteed income, and a comprehensive just transition framework, and so forth, among many other solutions. No significant water policy as part of the climate and biodiversity agendas will be possible if those challenging the status quo and proposing radical alternatives aren't at center of key international water fora and in key basins. The examples presented by our wonderful panelists will drive home this point in the realm of corporate control. I hope myself to uplift several struggles that are examples of private sector and colonial military interests, which, by the way, are hardly distinct labels, impeding the possibility for a just or safe water policy. As a climate and anti-war campaigner with Code Pink, I am particularly interested in teasing apart the interstices of increased militarism, particularly in my country, the United States, and the advance of the climate crisis. What becomes clear is that much as the modern American police were originally deployed to protect property rights as slave patrols, the modern United States military is rooted in a national project of property protection and expansion and extraction. In this way, it comes to mirror the multinational corporations it often ultimately serves, viewing the planet on which we live as expendable, as both a weapon and resource. A few examples of some of these water justice issues perpetrated by the US military and US military allies, it should be said, provide a handful of examples out of millions why the Department of Defense could not be more of a misnomer. In Guam, for example, where indigenous islanders are called American citizens but are refused the right to vote, the US military occupies 30% of the island. As the US continues setting the stage for massive war with China, military training is done at these firing ranges where close to 7 million ammunitions per year are fired right over the main source of Guam's drinking water. This is the Guam Lens Aquifer. And the base is now installing wells which will extract 1.2 million gallons of water each day, which will obviously threaten the source of water for indigenous Guamanians. On the island of Oahu, the Navy base at Red Hill houses a massive bulk fuel storage facility, and due to proper lack of oversight in both 2014 and 2021, massive spills of jet fuel and boat fuel at this storage facility has flooded the aquifer and groundwater of local communities and military families alike. Local communities have shown symptoms such as nausea, diarrhea, and skin rashes, and are in danger because of this lack of oversight by the Navy, which has leveraged its power to slow down the shutting down of Red Hill, as well as failing to take proper accountability. Oahu Water Protectors, grassroots organization, has sprung up in response to this crisis to challenge the military's power. And it should be said, in Palestine in 1967, occupying Israeli forces and settlers seized control of all water resources. To this day, Israel retains control of all water between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, with the exception of a small aquifer under the Gaza Strip. It has been described to me by friends from the region, the shock of seeing massive water storage tanks atop Palestinian homes and villages where they do not have reliable access to water. Meanwhile, Israeli settlers do and do not have such tanks atop their homes. These are towns that are mere meters away from each other. Water is often also weaponized by Israeli settlers, at times purposefully contaminated or cut short so that Palestinian indigenous villagers must leave their space, must leave their indigenous homelands to seek water, while Israeli settlers are enabled to move in. We see in this instance that water rights are manipulated by the occupation, and if those rights were better protected on the international stage, deadly and illegal settlement of Palestine may be hampered, and the region may be aided on a path towards justice. Now, I share these examples of water rights being stripped by militarism, colonialism, and an economic wargaming to demonstrate that when determining what is right, we must follow the water. Following the water, with an understanding that water is life, and therefore a human right, should generate a clear guide to our policies, both geopolitically and economically. This logic is one that translates handily to the level of corporate control, which today's panelists will help to expose. As water at last moves to the center of international climate and biodiversity foreign policy, it's urgent to promote in all spaces where global water policy is being shaped, fierce, transparent critiques about corporate influence and corollary false solutions at the center of global water policy. These include, as I've said above, nature-based solutions, corporate financing, and public-private partnerships, among others. Systemic radical economic policy alternatives needs to be discussed as well in all significant spaces regarding water policy in keeping with the Ecosocial and Intercultural Pact of the South, Colombia's Decalogue of Environmental Solutions presented at COP27, critiques of COP27 and COP15 offered by groups such as the Indigenous Environmental Network and my organization Code Pink, among numerous others. While many important alternative platforms are being put forth by Indigenous leaders and water rights coalitions regarding global water policy, including rights of nature legal platforms and environmental flow science, among others, often these voices aren't in key decision-making spaces, nor are systemic global economic reforms being discussed in these spaces. Water policy seems to be taking shape in a parallel universe. A water future decided by a few corporate-led coalitions and allies are coalesced around quote-unquote nature-based solutions. Public-private alliances and private financing is in one universe, unchallenged, while indigenous leaders, water justice groups, and others challenging corporate-led domination and the need for systemic alternatives are in another universe. It's vital, therefore, to bring to all key water decision-making spaces, including at the level of the basin, fierce critique to corporate solutions and radical systemic alternatives to them. We do not have time to continue trying to put out this fire with a flamethrower. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Teddy, for your participation. Now we will move to the presentation of 3 case studies that illustrate the water crisis we face in 3 different regions of the world. First, Oscar Beita and Jorge Beita Reyes will present a case in Costa Rica. Oscar is a member of the Living Rivers movement in Costa Rica, currently living in Volcán River Basin, and together with family members, he's working to transform a family cattle ranch into a forest and water conservation farm that also produces food for local residents. Jorge Beita Reyes is a traditional farmer with roots in the Cabecar indigenous community in Costa Rica, who is directing a project to revive the culture of small-scale agriculture in the Volcán Basin. Welcome, Oscar and Jorge, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Chema, for giving us the opportunity to present. I am going to share the screen right now. Okay. Thing is there. The following presentation is a reflection about the corporatization of water management in river basins located in the Central American dry migratory corridor and up to the southwest of the United States into the Colorado River Basin, which is perhaps inadvertently in significant ways delaying important conversations about the viability of the current export economy in a time of accelerated climate change. On the cusp of the UN Water Conference, many reports and studies are being released stating that the climate, biodiversity, and water crisis are worse than it was previously thought, and that it will not be possible to solve the climate and biodiversity crisis without first addressing the impending water crisis. Okay. Some points of agreement in the current water debate are that nature needs to be at center, that we need the active participation in decision-making tables of those who have traditionally been absent, primarily indigenous people, women, and youth. At center of this presentation, though, is dissent from a growing trend of embracing corporate leadership in funding and shaping global water policy without a more thorough public debate. The Volcán River Basin on the right side of your screen is in the south of Costa Rica and is part of the Gran Terraba River Basin, the largest in the country. This basin is also part of the Central American dry migratory corridor, traveled these days by hundreds of thousands of migrants, having communities experiencing the consequences, living communities experiencing the consequences of climate change, poverty, and exclusion. Sound water management should enable society to ask a few simple questions. First question, given the climate emergency, can we sustain the current export economy in our region? Second question, are the needed legal, economic, and scientific frameworks guiding the discussion? Drawing from different fields, all embracing the need to legally and scientifically protect nature's limits and rights first. And third question, are all the people we need at the decision-making tables? Del Monte arrived in the county of Buenos Aires in 1979, enticed by government tax incentives designed to promote non-traditional exports as part of the structural adjustment program negotiated with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to address the serious economic crisis affecting Costa Rica in the early 80s. My cattle ranching family has been in this region for 4 generations, and we remember well how it was before Del Monte. 40 years later, the region has changed in the following ways. The quality of the waters has deteriorated and the rivers are drying up. The fields are rapidly losing the topsoil. The air polluted with the smoke from biomass fires and tractors spraying chemicals. But most importantly, the company has changed how people relate to each other. Today, despite the cultural changes we have experienced, the company is the people. Most people are grateful to have a job with the company, and they identify completely with the company. In a generation, we actually went from subsistence farming to specialized agro-industrial production, from growing food in small plots of land to purchasing at the supermarket, among others. And this growing export economy based on cattle, pineapple, and sugarcane brought increasing drug use, migration, and crime to the basin. It is not that the company doesn't understand and want to repair the damage which it, along with ranchers and other entities, had been a part of. In part, to help address the shifting environment and climate, 2 years ago, Del Monte signed an alliance with GIZ, the German government international cooperation agency, to bring positive change to the region. The goals of the alliance center on promoting both forest conservation and reforestation in the upper part of the basin, as well as strengthening a local economy based on ecotourism. These goals are valid and are promoted as nature-based solutions. In addition, Del Monte negotiated as part of the alliance with the Ministry of the Environment to increase the funding available for payment for environmental services in the basin. By bringing more of the water, of the national water tariff it pays into the basin, the Payment for Environmental Services program is at center of the environmental leadership Costa Rica is recognized for worldwide. This step, too, has positive impacts. More medium-scale farmers and ranchers will be incentivized to reforest in this basin. In addition, Del Monte and GIZ are also supporting community-based organizations like local water management associations and environmental education programs, among others, to promote its water sustainability goals and enhance its corporate image. The posters on the right side of the screen are examples of these initiatives, especially the one at the bottom. It is an event that a local water committee is organizing to promote water conservation, and Del Monte is one of the sponsors. So what is not to like? Let's consider again the 3 common sense questions related to sound water management in light of Del Monte's GIZ alliance. Given the climate emergency, is there enough water to sustain the current export economy in this region? What becomes important, perhaps the single most important reason to question the ways in which corporate-led water management breaks down, is the narrative that is shaped around the alliance's main goal of reforesting the upper base part of the basin. The narrative is that the upper basin was deforested by ranchers. There is little mention of the role of pineapple in deforesting other parts of the basin. And the goal of reforesting is to ensure that there is water for jobs, a continuation of the pineapple economy. This delays the urgency, in keeping with yesterday's released IPCC report, of imagining what a post-export economy will look like, how to incentivize it, which other steps need to be taken in order to bring it into being. Just as it has become apparent globally that we can't continue with petroleum, nor can we continue with large-scale industrial agriculture, the benefits of deforesting the upper basin are undermined by the fact that society loses the little time it has left to make a much more profound transformation to adequately face the climate emergency. Second question, are the needed legal, economic, scientific frameworks guiding the discussion? Tools to implement a more profound transition are also undermined by being designed as unimportant or not as important. In this case, basically, the need for a more rigorous environmental flows methodology in the basin, respecting a cap on the water rivers can actually offer in the context of a shifting climate, is shut down. It also becomes harder to rally political will for it. And the final question, are all the people we need at the decision-making tables? What becomes important is that among stakeholders at the table, there is trust among them in speaking openly. This is hard to do when people worry about losing their jobs. The issue is that this structure of a widening wave of relationships is one, consolidating the power structure that created the problem in the first place, and that people are beginning to see the company instead of the government or themselves as the problem solvers. So then what is a rational path out of this situation? ¿Sigues tú?
Esa problemática del agua, la mejor idea, digamos, es volver al principio de lo de antes, donde
Well, Jorge is saying that with this problem, with the water problem we have in the basin, that the best thing to do is to come back to the past.
es empezar a cultivar la tierra como los indígenas de antes que trabajaban, cuidaban el agua, y hacían las cosas, para empezar a cultivar y cultivar ese deseo de vivir y de seguir cuidando el agua que es vida para nosotros, producir la tierra.
We need to go back to the past and plant food the way indigenous people did it before, polycultures, and bring back production and food to prepare ourselves for the upcoming crisis.
El principio del experimento, digamos, estamos experimentando la forma de una finca ganadera convertirla en partes para producir comida, sembrar todo tipo de cultivo que produzca comida, pero relacionado también con el tiempo, el ambiente de las cosas, manejándolo de una manera que se trabaja con el tiempo, utilizando el agua que cae de...
So we are experimenting transforming a cattle ranch into a food production farm. And we are playing or experimenting with the weather too. I mean, going along the weather patterns as we plant food.
Y que en la experiencia que tenemos como indígenas que somos, que conocemos la vida, conocemos la tierra y las cosas, es de que uno puede vivir de la tierra produciendo las cosas, llevando las cosas a nivel con el ambiente como tiene que ser, sin exagerar, sin destruir lo que es el agua o consumiendo más de las cosas, sino aprovechando todo lo que Dios nos da para poder producir la experiencia y utilizando todo.
In our experience as indigenous farmers, we know that we can live from the land. We know that if we plant food, that this can sustain us for years to come. And so it's a matter of returning to our roots and work with the land, but also respecting the environment.
Y luego cultivando productos que nos sirvan y plantas frutales, cambiando ese ritmo de vida, se puede decir, para enseñarle a los jóvenes, para inculcarle a las personas que no saben, toda la experiencia que uno sabe, y luego seguir.
We can plant food, we can plant citrus, we can also provide opportunities for young people to learn this art of planting and also protecting the environment at the same time.
Y también para todas las producciones, las cosas, uno puede tener la experiencia que no solo uno puede vivir de una empresa o ser esclavo de muchas cosas, destruyendo lo que Dios nos ha dado, que es el agua, pasando nomás, sino tratando de contribuir para ver en qué forma podemos mejorar la calidad de vida.
We also learn that we can live without destroying the land and asking for blessings from God, and also develop a new generation of people who are going to come and learn to cultivate too.
Sí, la experiencia también es de que todo lo que hemos producido, si en una hectárea digamos, de pastizales para ganado, yo produzco de todo, eso me alcanza para dar comida a mucha gente, a muchas personas, mientras que en una hectárea usted puede criar solo un animal o dos, y eso para poder distribuirlo a toda la gente tendría que ser, digamos, años, tiempos, mientras que la producción es seguido.
In a hectare of land, you might be able to raise a cattle that is going to be there for 3-4 years before you actually send it to the market. But during all this time, if that hectare of land, you are planting food, you will keep your family fed, you will keep your family well-nourished over those 4 years that you were waiting for the cow to be ready for the market.
Y respetar también lo que Dios nos ha dejado, que es el agua, la naturaleza, las cosas, trabajando con ellos de la mano, sin destruirlos, sin contaminar, sin hacer las cosas.
So we need to respect what God has given us, the waters, the soil, the plants, and work with them without actually destroying them, because that will give us the opportunity to continue and to go ahead. Thank you very much, and we will get you back the screen.
Thank you very much, Oscar and Jorge, for your sharing your experiences. And now our next speaker is Tricia Gerardet. Tricia is a founding member of the group Sustainable Water Network in Arizona, which was started 6 years ago by a small group of people, all white, mostly women, who had been working on water issues in Arizona for decades. They decided to try to amend Arizona water law to include water for rivers as a legally protected use. She has been working on river protection issues in Arizona for more than 25 years as an engaged citizen. With many hours of consultation with water expert attorneys, they created a proposal that has been introduced to the legislature for 4 years now, with no success so far, but they plan to keep trying. Tricia and her partners think that their push for the best possible approach, however, has led to some smaller but still useful changes to the laws. Welcome, Tricia.
Thank you, Jose Maria. I will share my screen. And that will be here. I will play from start. Uh-oh. There it is. So I will be doing a brief presentation about the Colorado River, which is in the United States Southwest. Oh, can't do next. So for those around the world, this in blue is the Colorado river basin. It's quite large and covers or crosses 7 states in the United States. And all of these blue lines eventually join the Colorado River, which used to end in the Gulf of California here in Mexico. It seldom gets there anymore. But that is where we are, and that's mostly a desert region. So here are dramatic photos, just 2 years apart, of the water levels at one of the large reservoirs called Lake Mead. And you can see why there are many headlines in the United States about crisis in the Colorado River Basin. The river has faced one fundamental problem, which is humans and their water use have been taking more than the river can keep giving the supply. Here are some headlines from recent newspapers. One from December last year from Las Vegas. And the second one from last month out of Los Angeles. And the second headline is a reflection of there having been a lot of rain and snow across the western parts of the US. And so there's been a lot of water coming down some of the rivers. And so people have had a tendency to say, well, everything's okay now. We have lots of water in the river. And so this story was about the reservoirs unlikely to refill in our lifetimes. For those who may not have ever seen desert in the US Southwest, or even a healthy desert river, this is what it looks like. It's referred to sometimes as a ribbon of green. And so you can see that it is spectacular and life-giving. So as a reminder that the UN General Assembly adopted that resolution that's listed there, recognizing the right to clean and safe drinking water as a fundamental human right. Instead, we have economists and corporations arguing that water is and should be a commodity. And you have heard a powerful presentation from Oscar about how the corporation in his area has used water to grow their crop. And as Teddy pointed out in the first presentation, water is life. And that is true for all life, not only humans. So how can we have rivers when water is a commodity and goes to whoever has money? This is a big challenge for restoring the Colorado River to a more natural state. And again, just emphasizing what Oscar had to say about needing a broad range of stakeholders. We need to include people with knowledge, the native tribes, the grassroots, people who've been working the land for generations. And in the discussions about the Colorado River, they have 1 to 2 seats at the table. And the table is then dominated by corporations, business groups, mining interests, large agricultural like Del Monte, not in the Colorado River Basin, but its equivalent. So we do not have a robust discussion, and we do not have the right people in the room to talk about our need to deal with this Colorado River crisis, it's called. It's a crisis for humans. It's been a crisis for other forms of life for longer. And I'll close with a beautiful shot of braided rivers, they're called, in Alaska. And what does water want? And water will ultimately go where it wants. And humans, the humans who are currently in charge of a lot of things, I think need to learn that better. So I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Tricia, for your presentation. Next, Marcel Saref will share an experience taking place in Egypt. Ms. Saref is a passionate advocate for refugees and migrants' rights, with a main focus on gender-based violence and gender issues. She has been supporting the Refugees Platform in Egypt since 2020, promoting a digitized ecosystem for refugees and migrants. Refugees Platform is a non-governmental organization that works on human rights with a deep focus on people's on-move rights and advocacy in the area of Middle East and the Mediterranean. Welcome, Marcel, to our activity.
Thanks, Jose Maria, and I'm happy to be part of this panel today and have a different discussion around water justice and bringing new voices to water forum. So I will talk basically about refugees, not just in Egypt, but the refugees states when it comes to climate change and it comes to water lack. So a refugee is defined by the UNHCR as a person who has crossed an international border, owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religious, nationality, membership of particular social group, or political opinion. And this is regarding to the Convention of 1951 to states of refugees. But like, if we look in the definition of the refugee, we can find like the climate refugee. So in some contexts, the definition extending to persons fleeing events seriously disturbing public policy. But in the same time, this serious disturbing public order, it's not including the refugees from climate change. Climate change, why they are not included? Because they consider climate change affects people inside their own countries and typically create internal displacement before it reaches to a level where it's placed people across border. However, there may be a situation where the refugees criteria of 1951 Convention or the border refugees criteria of regional refugee law framework could apply. And people may have a valid claim for refugee states, for example, where the adverse effect of climate change interact with armed conflict and violence. Building on this, like in 2022, UNHCR issued legal consideration to guide interpretation and steer international discussion on such claims. So regardless the term of climate refugee, it's not endorsed by the UNHCR, which is mean the person who is displaced or running across the border for the climate change, whatever the flood, whatever it has been happening in his country, it's not considered as a refugee. And take a refugee state or a refugee document, it means he had to be associated to a serious matter, which considered by UNHCR as conflict violence or persecuted for political opinion. But in Human Rights Committee discussion in case of Teteu, in January 2022, under the international human rights law, they stated that people displaced across the border in context of climate change and disaster has a right not to be returned to a country where they would face a serious risk of irreparable harm to their right to life. So here, this extension and this amendments for the Human Rights Committee decision, it include like he will not get a refugee document, but he still has the right to not be back to the same where he came from. And it takes us to another point, like when it comes to war and conflict refugees, they are not they are protected by UNHCR, and it's abused to send them back to the countries they were coming from. And in this case, it's also applied for the climate refugees or people who suffered from climate change. But in the same time, when the war ends or the conflict ends, we find like the country is ready to get back the citizens. So as a Syrian or as a Yemenian, like, yeah, the current situation in Syria and Yemen don't allow people to back there. But I mean, if the country is settled and it had peace, so the refugee can back while he's in the transit position. But for the climate change refugees or people who flee from floods or natural disasters, they can't back to the country because there is no situation that end up this threatened. And in this term, as a refugee platform, we have released our report in arbitrary detention and forcibly deportation of Eritrean asylum seekers from Egypt. I'm happy to share, let me share the link in the group chat so you also can have a look around it, where we had some of, where's the shot? Where we had some of the Eritrean refugees have been deported from Egypt and back to the countries they run from. And Eritrea, by the coast and the Horn of Africa, where they're the most affected part of Africa by the climate change. Like in 2017, the European Commission conducted the most comprehensive analysis of heat wave risks and found that tropical and subtropical Africa will be severely affected. The Gulf of Guinea, Horn of Africa, which is Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, and part of Ethiopia. The Arabian Peninsula, Angola, and DRC are expected to experience heat waves of 60 to 100 days every 2 years. There will be heat waves longer than 180 days, once every 30 years over parts of Central Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. In East Africa and Yemen, the consequences of climate crisis have already caused humanitarian catastrophes. Years of drought and wars caused by resources scarcity and food insecurity lead to thousands of deaths, malnourished children, and starvation, and millions of internally and externally displaced people. And displaced people from Yemen and East Africa countries are moving across the borders. And some are already arriving in Egypt, such as the displacement of Somalia due to the effects of climate change in the past time, and the displacement of more Sudanese towards Egypt due to the floods in recent years. This year alone, like in 2022, the White Nile flood killed more than 100 people, affected more than 278,500 people across Sudan, and displaced many Sudanese internally and externally. And it gets us in the intersection between climate change, forced displacement, and human rights. Like, for example, in Egypt, we have like around 5 million refugees. Some are documented as refugees with UNHCR, some documented as migrants with IOM, and some are undocumented. And in this term, having a departure and externalization from the refugees to back to the home country. It really affects them since it's not settled, it's not safe to be back. And in Egypt, refugees don't stay in campus, they stay in the city and in houses like citizens. But also in the same term, we can't forget about people who stays in campus. The refugees stay in formal camps and non-formal camps. And those people don't have really access to a clean water or a water source. Like in formal campus typically have better wash, water sanitation, and hygiene services. They are not always up to safely managed standards. These standards include the limitation of shared facilities and one premise water source, with water sources less than 200 meters, which is 656 feet away. But in Uganda, for example, there are 11 refugee camps in Uganda, and it's formal camps, and it's only 43% of these camps had inhabitation have access to water less than 200 meters. And we can imagine like this formal camp designed by the UNHCR and documented, and they don't have the basic standards of access to water, which burdens them with physical burden, financial burden, and put them in the risk of lack of water and hydration, especially for kids. For undocumented refugees and migrants in transit, or they trying to find their way, migration route to enter another country, it's the risk education by the authority, they can't get access, or they can't have a permanent source of water while their migration route. So they stay in one place and try to find like a river, a lake, or something beside them. And this place, they use it in dangerous methods, and they use it for everything. Like on the French-Italian border, they use a river as a water source for drinking, for toilet, and a place to cook, in order to avoid detection by the Red Cross or by the government. So they prefer to stay around a place where they don't have easy access to water, or not have like a clean water, instead of being detention. And this water justice and people who can't access water because of their legal state, or because of they fleeing from their countries of flood or desertation, or whatever the climate change happening there, they have to have justice to a clean source water and easy to access. And by the COP27, the Egyptian coalition have signed a petition, have launched a petition to get signs from different human rights activists and organizations around the world. So they get 1,400 signatures from 86 countries ahead of COP27 to open the civic space and release everyone repatriated detained. Let me share the petitions with you as well, because if we're talking about justice and people have to, I'm sorry, I can't read the chat now. I will wrap up and then back the question in the chat from Krista. So if we're talking about water justice, which is mean we need activists like environmental activists, human rights activists, to speak up instead of those people who can't have access to water or have been affected by the climate change. But in this term, like we have two problems, or like in our concern or our area of work, we have like what I mentioned for the French and the Italian borders, and also the EU funding for Egyptian coast guards and North Africa coast guards, where they prevent people from move, which is abuse for the Human Rights Charter. And we have developed a report about this fund and how we need people to stand in this term. And let me put it in the chat. haven't need people to stand in this term, but at the same time as they stand it inside Egypt, it have been detention for many human rights defenders, which part of them were like environmental activists, and we're talking about justice and more environmental actions with the Egyptian environment. So because in the last period, in the last 5 years, the Egyptian government have been tackling a lot of trees and losing some water sources, not waters, but like the branch of the Nile. And regarding to the river Nile, it's crossed by around 9 countries from Africa, starting from Congo, reaching to Egypt as the last point in it. But nowadays we have the Ethiopian Dam and its reputation on access to water. So between the Egyptians and the Ethiopians, it's been a risk of like, does Ethiopia will stop the river and decrease the portion of Egypt from it, and Egypt have a high reproductive and the high increasing in its population. So it takes us to two parts in this. The Ethiopian dam have been refilled many times and affected the portion of Egypt and affected the level of the water in the Nile river. And that led to, and some Ethiopian refugees in Egypt have been considered by the Egyptians the reason why we don't have enough water now in the Nile. So it created a conflict between some Egyptians and some Ethiopians around the water. And it takes us to, are we gonna back again to fight over resources in the era of technology and all this globalization? And after 20,000 years of humanitarian life. And let me get to our recommendation in conclusion. That includes the lack of water and serious climate change as a serious matter, and considers a person displaced in the context of disaster and the climate change as a refugee, and include climate refugees as refugees from war, from conflict, from political point of view. They can apply as a refugee from climate change, a serious matter. Open the space for environmental activists and the human rights defenders without restrictions and the persecution from the government. So we can have more voices and advocates for the idea. Consider access to water and sanitation. The legal sense, or whoever they are, they need to have a right to access for water, clean water and sanitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcel, for your presentation, for joining our activity. Next, a general reflections on the topics discussed today will be presented by Tatiana Roa Avendaño. Tatiana participates in the organization Sensat, Agua Viva, Amigos de la Tierra in Colombia, and is also a member of the Ecosocial and Intercultural Pact of the South, el Pacto Ecosocial e Intercultural del Sur. Welcome, Tatiana, and thanks for joining our event. I will share the screen with your presentation. Okay, Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Hello,
Hello,
can
Tatiana.
you listen me?
Yes, very well.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. Thank you for being in this space. Thank you to the people who organize and prepare this event. And the present times, water must be central to our debate and proposal. Next one, please. Thank you. I begin to explain what the ecosocial and intercultural path of the South is. The ecosocial path is an initiative of a group of people and organizations from different Latin American countries. We are motivated by the urgency of building social dynamics capable of responding to and countering the dynamics of capitalism rearrangement, concentration of wealth, and destruction of ecosystems that we see emerging in the midst of the crisis of civilization and of configuring together with those who wish to join us a collective horizon of transformation for our American and guaranteed and dignified future. Next one, please. Thank you. After almost 3 years of the COVID-19 pandemic and the catastrophic consequence of Russian invasion of Ukraine, a new normal has emerged. This new status quo is marked by worsening social, economic, political, ecological, biomedical, and geopolitical crises, with environmental collapses looming. Everyday life has become increasingly militarized, and access to good food, clean water, and affordable health care has become more restricted. Governments have become more autocratic, and unregulated technology has accelerated inequality. The driver of this unjust status quo, capitalism, patriarchy, racism, colonialism, predatory relations with the nature, and various fundamentalists are exacerbating the situation. We urgently need to implement new vision of social transition and transformation that are gender just, regenerative, and protect the commons, both locally and internationally. The ecosocial path of the South and other organizations from the Global South have launched the Manifesto for an Ecosocial Energy Transition from the people of the South to address the unique problem faced by the Global South. We had been exacerbated by a new colonial energy model that perpetuates an imbalance of power inherited from a colonial legacy. Next one, please. The rich capitalist countries are putting more pressure on the Global South to extract material, water, and energy and rely on cheap labor. The North ecological debt to the South is increasing due to the new clean energy transition that require materials like cobalt, lithium, balsa wood, land, and new infrastructure. The decarbonization of the rich exported-oriented North requires environmental despoliation of the Global South, which affects millions of people and non-human life. The Global South has become a zone of sacrifice, providing resources, material, energy, water for the North's benefits. The North has prioritized securing the global supply chains for critical raw material and has pushed for more trade and investment agreement with the South. This agreement protects corporate power and rights and subject the state to legal suits. The Global North is using this agreement to control the clean energy transition and create a new colonialism. Next one, please. Thank you. More depth to build for the south country means more depth to build industries and large-scale agriculture to supply the north. Large agriculture demands much water, demands more chemical to the crops. More depth demand more territories. Greater demand on water, land, livelihood. This pressure on territory leads to a vicious circle of inequality and destruction. Next one, please. Thank you. However, we must not forget that the current energy model based on fossil fuels, coal, gas, oil, and mega dams has devastated peoples and territory. I would like to place a special emphasis on the intensive use of water in the current energy model, which not only consume and deprives people of water, but also pollutes it, even damaging in a perpetuity. The current energy model has caused a deep system crisis. However, the current proposal for energy transition presents us, as mentioned above, with great challenges. Minor challenges in this energy matrix are not enough. The entire energy system must be transformed from production and distribution to consumption and waste, rather than solely technology. The solution to these interlocked crises are above all political. We need a cultural transformation. Next one, please. In our manifesto, we propose a proposal. First one is energy is an elementary and inalienable human right, and energy democracy must be our goal. We reject the false solution that come with new forms of energy colonialism, now in the name of the green transition. We support a policy of reparation for the losses and damages suffered by indigenous people, vulnerable groups, and local communities to mean mining large dams and dirty energy projects. We reject the expansion of the hydrocarbon frontier in our country through fracking of offshore projects. Next one, please. We reject green colonialism in the form of land grabbing for solar and wind farms, indiscriminate extraction of critical minerals, and the promotion of technological solutions such as hydrogen. We demand the effective protection of nature and human rights defenders, in particular, indigenous people and women. And we demand the elimination of energy poverty and the promotion of alternative, decentralized, and equitable distributed renewable energy projects owned by communities. And we denounce international trade agreements that penalize countries that want to curb fossil fuel extraction. Next one, and the last one, thank you. I close with the words of our President Gustavo Petro in his speech in Egypt. Humanity must know that its global politics does not overcome the climate crisis. It will become extinct. The time of decision we live in must pass us to act now and globally as human beings, with or without the permission of government. It's the time of the mobilization for whole humanity. Water for life, not for death. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, for your presentation, and thank you for joining this activity. We deeply thank the speakers for sharing their reflections, vision, and experiences. And now we open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. Please write your comments and questions in the chat, and the speakers can use the microphone to comment or discuss or raise questions to other speakers. So the floor is open for the discussion section. Let's see, we have some questions in the chat. We have a question from Tricia. The question says, as people flee from devastated countries into countries with more capacity, how do we address not devastating those countries? This is a question to any of the presenters. And we have also another question from Madeline Kieser saying, how do we ensure that these kinds of open challenges to capitalism and propose alternatives to it are in every water decision-making sphere? That's another question.
Emma, can you clarify the question from Tricia? I don't understand when she said, let's see, where is the question again?
Let me see. The question is, as people flee from devastated countries into countries with more capacity, how do we address not devastating those countries? Question to any of the presenters.
So when she said not devastating those countries, she means the new countries where they have arrived?
Yes, the new countries. If more and more people arrive, how do they not become devastated?
Okay.
I have a response I'd like to share to Madeline's question. How do we ensure that these kinds of open challenges to capitalism and proposed alternatives to it are in every water decision-making sphere? And something I'd like to contribute to that discussion is something I mentioned in my piece, which was a conversion from GDP metrics to GPI metrics. So GDP, as we all know, stands for gross domestic product and is often used as a health metric for a people, right? When all that this metric describes is the value of goods and services produced and sold over a certain period of time within a nation. Which is a pretty absurd concept to describe the health of a people when we know that health is encapsulated in such concepts as education, as water access and the cleanliness of our water, as forest cover, as income equality and things like this, right? But we know that the systems that we face are controlled by this metric of GDP. And as long as politicians or federal economists or corporate leaders are able to point to GDP and say, we've contributed to this number and it's growing, we can label that as progress, right? So you can have half of a country's forest cover be decimated over the course of a year. You can have poverty rates double, but as long as billionaires or corporate leaders who are sapping our water sources from indigenous land make enough profit to displace what indigenous communities and poor people are losing, that is considered progress. So if what I like to say about this is if we actually change how we measure progress across the globe, we may actually able to achieve some. And this is where GPI comes in. It stands for Genuine Progress Indicator. And essentially it's an economic metric that takes into account all the factors for GDP, as well as placing a value on things like education, placing a value on things like water access and cleanliness, placing a value on forest cover and protecting our basins. And so this is an opportunity from the top down, right? We've discussed a lot of solutions from the bottom up and grassroots solutions, which are, it must be said, the most important to underscore and to build up and to highlight. Fighting at the grassroots level for a metric that would then allow, or rather disallow, corporate leaders to consider anything but the best solutions for people as progress would be key in our fight for equitable water solutions and to fighting capitalism in these fora. Because we'll have the undeniable evidence that is a shared metric across economic spaces, across grassroots spaces, in water fora and climate fora to discuss what actually progress might look like. So that's one thing that I'd like to highlight and underscore. This is one of, by the way, in a month, Earth Day is coming up. And this is one of Code Pink's, my organization's main demands, is a conversion from GDP to GPI. So I hope that folks will continue to think about that conversion, because I think it's really crucial for the fight.
Thank you, Teddy. And there is a comment by Tricia saying GDP measurement is so insane that the disasters that require rebuilding of this concept of GDP, following up your comment, Teddy. I don't see any other comment. I would like to raise a question to any of the participants today. According to your experiences in the struggle in your own specific contexts, how difficult it is, or how do you manage to move from the grassroots and community-based type of struggle towards the upper political levels of decision-making in your own contexts? How do you do that? How you have done that? How difficult it is? What kind of constraints or difficulties have you faced when you move from one level to another, so to speak?
Jose would recommend to put the question in the chat so everyone can think about it.
Yes, okay. Thank you. I will write the question.
And I'm happy after the discussion to answer Trisa's question about how we can make sure we are not devastating the new countries that people flee to.
Thank you.
I think regarding the question presented by Chema, I think that Jorge and I, we can talk about how difficult it has been, for example, trying to change this farm that was a traditional farm, a cattle ranch that was producing cattle into a food production enterprise. I think that, I mean, there is a lot of, one of the elements is there is a lot of pressure locally, I mean, in the family and also in the community to conform to what has been the standard economy. So it hasn't been easy at all. And in addition, the production right now is a subsistence production, and it's not something that would generate the same level of income that cattle ranching does provide. So that's one of the elements that I wanted to contribute.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Oscar. Let's see, I don't see. Tatiana, you want to make, I think you can, you can speak, Tatiana. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I would like to make a general comment of the question that have been asked. The transformation has to be through of not only in the technological terms, but the cultural change is necessary. It's impossible to continue on this path on unlimited growth. It is important to recognize that the the capitalism system of life is destroying life in all its expression. We need to transform everything that we take for granted today as natural. The way we relate it to nature, to water, to river, to food, to land, we need to change this actual or current relation. There are many experiences around the world of other ways of relation to the nature. We need to look in this perspective. What say this experience? What teach this experience to the new transformation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a comment here that I haven't read from Terry after Tricia's comment. And Terry says, that's right, Tricia. And this leads to the enabling of what has been termed disaster capitalism or economic opportunism towards chaotic events, which are decimating the local populations for the benefit of billionaires and the corporate class. And following up on Tatiana's comment, I would like to stress this point of cultural work, the need to challenge the prevailing views and this common sense technological approach. It is so important to challenge this view through many different mechanisms and activities at the community level, at the country level, in the media, and so on. So I think this call, which in Spanish we say, otro mundo es posible, another world is possible, is a very important point in our communities, in our cultures, in our country. So the cultural struggle is a very important issue that comes up from this activity and from other reflections in this particular field. Let's see, there is a new Tricia comments that my gratitude to all the translators who have contributed today. Indeed, we thank you very much for your participation and your contribution, the interpreters. I like to remark that this activity is being recorded and it will be shared in the web. So we will distribute the link for the video of this activity so that you can share it with your communities, your groups, in many instances. We expect to have this ready within the next day. So we will let you know so that you can share this link and other people can see this excellent activity of today. Let me see, we have more comments. I don't think we have more comments. So I don't know if any of the speakers would like to say a final word in our activity. No? Okay. Okay, if not, we are getting close we have reached the end of this space of reflection and critical testimony. The perspectives presented by the speakers today reflect an enormous concern and at the same time show how innovative and critical proposals on the subject of water are generated by different spaces and groups all over the world. We have seen how two main paradigms are currently opposed on the global water landscape: water as a commodity and water as a common good. We must raise the humanitarian and environmental logic of water as a common good against the commercial interests underscored by the growing role of large corporations and the logic of the market in the water agenda. The paradigm of water for the common good is being promoted by thousands of groups and peoples and collectives all over the planet. It is this logic that must prevail and the one that we must firmly embrace and promote at all levels. We hope that today's event will contribute to this task in which our very survival is at stake. Greetings to everybody. Thank you very much for the speakers and for all the people who attended this meeting, and have a very nice day. Thank you very much.